If that doesn't put Pickles toys on the map, nothing will. Unfortunately, there's still a few kinks.
If I had $1 for every time Stu Pickles made an invention that was going to put Pickles toys on the map, well, I'd have a little over $50. What can I say about Rugrats that I haven't said already? It's such an amazing and iconic Nicktoon. It was one of the first original Nicktoons right next to Doug and Ren and Stimpy, and of the three, it was by far the most popular. The original series had 9 seasons and ran for a total of 13 years, spanning from 1991 through 2004, delivering a whopping 172 episodes. There's a lot of things to love about this show, but one thing I was always enamored with as a kid was the wide variety of toys and inventions Stu Pickles would come up with. Sure, a ton of them were failures, but as Stu says, most geniuses aren't appreciated in their lifetime. That's why I combed through every single episode of Rugrats and compiled a list of every Stu Pickles invention, and today we are going to review every single Stu Pickles invention that was featured in the original series. A few things first, this video is only going to cover the inventions that we saw in the main original series and not the reboot. For the most part, it's only going to cover actual inventions that Stu directly talks about or uses. I won't be including things that we aren't sure he actually invented or things that aren't mentioned but just seen in passing. For example, there's an episode where Stu builds this fancy brick barbecue in his backyard, but he's following instructions from a book and not inventing it himself, so that won't be included. Or there's another episode where Dee Dee throws away a bunch of his old unsuccessful inventions, but only one is talked about directly. I'm going to be including the one talked about, but not the rest of the stack because we don't know what any of it is. Also, this list is kind of in order, but kind of not, because Paramount Plus doesn't do the best job at putting episodes in order, but without further ado, let's get right into it. First up is the Doorbell Camera Alert System. This one is basically the predecessor to the Ring doorbell. It alerts you when someone is at the door and gives you a live video feed of who it is, and you can speak to them through a speaker. This one is practical, creative, and ahead of its time. 8.5 out of 10. Next, we have the Hoverama. This thing is 36 inches long, 4 feet in diameter, it has 300 pounds of lift, and goes at more than 5 miles per hour. It runs off of 3 D batteries, 2 AA's, a C, and a 9-volt. Basically, it's a remote control UFO that has the carrying capacity to pick up people. I'd have a blast with this thing. Great invention, 9.5 out of 10. Next up is the Helioptertron, a robot that turns into a car helicopter thing, basically a knockoff Transformer. Assuming that Transformers don't already exist in the Rugrats universe, then I'd say this one is pretty creative, 7.2 out of 10. Up next is the Wacko Specs. Basically, they're a pair of funky glasses with fake eyeballs that pop out. Surely the eyes would get lost popping out like that, and also, why not just buy slinky eyeglasses that have been around since 1945? 3.9 out of 10. Up next, we have the Patty Pants doll. Basically, it's a baby doll that walks and talks. Not an exactly original idea, as there's a competing toy company that released the same toy before Stu could even put it out. 4.2 out of 10. Next is the Bonkomatic Baby Bumper. It offers complete cranial suspension, protection from 1001 hazards of the average American household, and basically it's a bowl with a stuffed animal in it and straps and toilet paper rolls affixed to it. At this point, why wouldn't you just buy a helmet? 2.4 out of 10. Next, we move on from toys to production equipment with the patented Pickles Patty Pants Production Powerhouse, a large machine that can make 7 Patty Pants dolls per minute. It's a huge contraption with a conveyor belt and some automated arms mounted onto it. Unfortunately, it still had some bugs at first that needed to be worked out, but it actually ended up working. And it's pretty smart if you ask me. It makes his job a lot easier, and I can respect that. 7.6 out of 10. Next up is the Quack-o-matic, the world's first fully automated weather vane. It tells the temperature in 10 cities, gives a 6-month weather forecast, and predicts earthquakes, floods, and meteor showers. It also kicks Stu's ass and gives him a traumatic brain injury. Solid 7.5 out of 10. Next, we have the Whirly Mover, Stu's first ever invention, a breakthrough for children's writing devices, even though it never really worked. In my opinion, it's a basic ride-on toy. It looks kinda cool, but there's plenty of other toys that can do the same thing. 4.3 out of 10. Next, we look into the future with the anti-gravity playpen. It's a playpen with no gravity, so the kids just float around. It doesn't make sense because the kids could easily float out of the playpen, and It's actually kind of impressive because this thing really works, but it does knock out the power in literally the entire city. Original, futuristic, and extremely dangerous. 7.9 out of 10. Next, we get to the furniture era of Pickles toys with the Stu Pickles Auto Sofa, a remote-controlled sofa that can adjust to some really inconvenient angles and positions. Stu gets trapped inside of the sofa, and it's actually pretty funny. Not practical, and it looks extremely uncomfortable, but it is pretty original. I've never seen a remote-controlled sofa before, so that's a thing. 5.2 out of 10. We continue the furniture era with Inflato-furniture. It's self-explanatory, inflatable furniture for your comfort. This one really just oozes 90s nostalgia, and I am just eating it up right now. 9.3 out of 10. This one technically wasn't made by Stu, but instead his alien counterpart. Presenting the Stu-Von 5000, the newest and easiest way to blow up troublesome planets. Basically, it's a remote that can destroy things just by the click of a button. This one would revolutionize the world as we know it. Imagine being able to destroy anything with the simple click of a small handheld device. 9.8 out of 10. Next, we move on to the Dummy Bear costume. Stu makes them, Drew sells them. Simple as that. Probably doesn't have the proper licensing to produce them for sale, but you know, sometimes we have to skirt laws like that. Meh. 3.7 out of 10. Moving on, we have the Hippocopter, a pink ballerina hippo with a helicopter propeller on the top of it. I personally have mixed feelings on this one. A hippo is the last thing I would ever expect to fly. Creative, but also quite the contradiction.
Stu, if hippos were meant to fly, they wouldn't weigh 3,000 pounds.
Solid 5 out of 10 right down the middle. Up next is the Bubble-Rama 3000, a toy that was supposed to make the world's largest bubble at first, but instead it ends up making a million bubbles. On one hand, I can imagine my kids enjoying this, but on the other hand, I can imagine bubble soap getting everywhere. As a parent, I hate this, but as a kid, I'd probably love it. 6.1 out of 10. Up next is the classic Boppo. Big inflatable clown that says,
"Hi, I'm Boppo,"
when you hit him. Not that creative in my opinion, but Tommy and Chucky loved it.
A kid his age should be playing with his friends, not alone in a room bopping his Boppo. That's right, Chucky's got a problem.
The toy served its purpose and was well loved. 7.3 out of 10. Next is the infamous Mr. Friend. It's a creepy, walking, talking clown doll. Personally, I see it as a mix of Stephen King's It and Chucky from Child's Play. This thing sends shivers down my spine. It embodies everything creepy about dolls. My least favorite part has to be the way its freaky mouth moves. 7.4 out of 10, simply for the creep factor. Next, to keep your baby from taking off their clothes, we have the Pickles Baby Suspenders. It features straps calibrated to your baby's weight and physical development, strong enough to keep the baby from pulling them off, but bumpered to stop any discomfort. It's basically some chains and straps that are electronically controlled to keep the baby's clothes on. Doesn't work, 2.3 out of 10. And moving on, we have Transformo, a toy bird that's supposed to transform into many other things. Stu gets upset when he sees an ad on TV for a competitor toy that does the same thing but successfully. Meanwhile, his just kind of falls apart. Again, doesn't work, but is more creative than the baby suspenders. I'll give it that. 4.3 out of 10. Next, we jump right into the holiday spirit with the Menorah. Stu basically reinvented the Menorah, complete with a fog machine, lights, fire, spinning dreidels, little animatronic dancing men, and bouncing whistles. And it straight up explodes. Honestly though, this thing is actually pretty sick. 8.4 out of 10. In honor of Mother's Day, we have the Assistor Project, a vacuum-like robot that has been programmed with everything a mom should know, except it's programmed poorly and doesn't work properly. Betty tries to help with the programming, but this thing was doomed from the start.
Yeah, I guess that's about everything it takes to be a mother.
Warning. System overload.
Now you know how I feel, Cupcake.
The thought of making a mother's job easier is nice, but this thing could never do the amount of work that a mom does. 1.9 out of 10. Next, we get creepy with the 10-gallon hat cam. Basically, a video camera hidden in a 10-gallon hat that you can use to secretly film someone. No. Just no. Flat 0 out of 10. Now we go into the medieval era with the Dragon. Stu never calls this thing by a specific name, but it's a giant dragon that has a cockpit inside with 2 seats for 2 different people to control it at the same time. Stu and his dad lose control of it, and the dragon destroys the entire Renaissance fair in the process. It's actually pretty cool, and personally I can imagine like a group of LARPing people who would probably have a good old time with this thing. 9.4 out of 10. Next up is the self-driving lawnmower, a lawnmower equipped with a solar-powered motor that basically makes it so you don't have to push the lawnmower yourself. I mean, okay, imagine a Roomba, but for your yard instead. 8.2 out of 10. Continuing with the yard equipment, we have the leaf lifter, a self-propelled vacuum that automatically eliminates all leaf-like materials. I mean, imagine a literal Roomba, but for your yard. Not a bad idea, especially if it can vacuum up the leftover grass from the self-driving lawnmower. Again, 8.2 out of 10. Ooh, this is a fun one. The Pickles Voice Frequency Modulator 5000, a device that changes the pitch of your voice when you talk into it.
So, how does it work? Hey, listen to me.
Well, I'll be. She sounds just like Charlotte.
I have to admit, I'd probably have a ton of fun messing around with this thing. It reminds me of this Darth Vader helmet that I had when I was a kid that made you sound like Darth Vader when you talk. Again, another toy that I would have an absolute blast with. 8.7 out of 10. Up next, we have the famous Reptar Wagon. It's a talking wagon that looks just like Reptar, and it also even has a raft mode for water travel. This thing is absolutely sick. I remember wanting this thing to be real when I saw it as a kid. 9.8 out of 10. Next is the Kangaroo, the maximum mechanism for infant mobility, a bouncing walker that has an infrared sensor that detects anyone or anything that gets too close, and a backing up alarm too. Personally, I like the design, and Dill seems to have a great time bouncing around in this thing. Not a bad invention by any means. 8.2 out of 10. Next, we have the Merry Magic Music Ball. Essentially, it's a colorful ball with a button on it that pops up a little merry-go-round when you press it. Now, I can imagine this thing being fun the first, second, and maybe even the third time you push the button, but other than that, it'd be pretty repetitive and boring. 4.4 out of 10. Next, we get sneaky with the Memory Booster 2000 shades. They're sunglasses that have a switch on the top that'll play back audio that you've recorded. They're kind of clunky, but also pretty practical. Like, if you have one super important thing that you just absolutely cannot forget, these can easily remind you. Sure, you could write it on your hand, but with these, you'll look cool while you remember it. It kind of reminds me of those like spy sets that you'd get in the early 2000s that comes with all those random trinkets that won't really help with spying, but they make you feel cool when you're a little kid. 7.6 out of 10. This one is kind of an honorable mention because it's not Stu's invention per se, but next is Tommy's invention. It's a rubber ball with a towel wrapped around it, tied with a rope. Attached to it are some keys, a rubber duck, and a teething ring. If Stu made this, I'd give it a really low score, but for a baby, Tommy did a fantastic job inventing this for his brother. 10 out of 10. Next, we have the opposite of the automatic lawnmower, the Lawn Grower 2000. It's a big old eyesore that goes in the middle of your yard, and it can fertilize and water your lawn in 3 seconds, according to Stu. Basically, it's a fancy sprinkler system. Imagine some kids thinking they're going to run through the sprinkler, but instead their skin starts to burn as they get sprayed with fertilizer. Terrible idea. 0.25 out of 10. Next up, we have the totally original Sprinklematic 6000, another automated yard sprinkler. It's already been done before. Unoriginal, recycled idea. 1 out of 10. Next is the totally practical Pickles Doorstopper 3000. It's a big metal electric door stopper that'll hold any door open at any angle you choose on the keypad.
Even in gale force winds.
Stu puts it way too low and Grandpa bangs his head on it. After realizing his invention sucks, he ends up collabing with Susie to make door stoppers out of her god-awful Reptar cereal bars she made with her Easy Bake Oven. I mean, at this point, why not just use a normal door stopper wedge? 2.1 out of 10. Okay, so this thing was never actually named on the show, so let's just call it the Pickles Bee-Bot 3000, because Stu likes adding a couple thousand to every invention he makes. It's a remote control bee and a robotic flower. The object of the game is to get the bee to retrieve the golden nectar in the flower. I personally would have a ton of fun with this toy. The flower is pretty irrelevant in my opinion. I'd just have a blast flying this thing around for fun. 8.4 out of 10. Up next is the Powerpicker 2000, an automatic apple picking machine. It's supposed to suck up the apples and sort them into bins, but it tries to eat Stu, sucking up his tie and then his hair.
With 20 gigabytes of horsepower, it's guaranteed to pick apples 200 times faster than the average human.
First of all, Stu, gigabytes aren't a unit of measurement that would apply here. Second of all, this takes all the fun out of apple picking, 3.2 out of 10. Next, we have the massive Animatronic Reptar. It's a giant metal Reptar made by Stu, controlled via simulated reality gloves. This giant behemoth would later appear in the Rugrats in Paris movie as the Euro Reptar theme park paid Stu to make it. This thing is super cool. My favorite part had to be the controls. The way you use the gloves to move its arms is really awesome, 9.2 out of 10. Up next we have the Finsters Treehouse. This one was pretty tough on me. Stu didn't really invent treehouses of course, but he did design and make this one by hand, and it is pretty sick. Tommy even refers to it as one of my daddy's inventions, so I felt like it did deserve a spot on the list. I would have loved this as a baby, 7.6 out of 10. Up next is the often overlooked Dustbot 3000. Okay, this one didn't really get a name, I just came up with Dustbot 3000, but it seems fitting to me. This thing is a robot that seems to have a camera on its face and vacuum hands. And if you're wondering why I call it the Dustbot 3000, well, here you go. If your house needs a good layer of dust, then look no further, Stu has you covered. Literally. 5.4 out of 10. Up next we have the automatic plunger. It's kind of like a drill with a plunger fastened to it. It plunges for you and it also spins. I'm not sure why you would need it to spin, but it does. 4 out of 10. Here we have the Sonic Insect Repeller. It's a gun that repels insects using sound waves, or at least that's what it's supposed to do. I want to give it bonus points for creativity, but this thing actually just attracts wasps.
I just remembered why I put my Sonic Insect Repeller in the closet.
What it lacks in functionality, it makes up for in creativity. 4.5 out of 10. Up next is a gift for Dee Dee, the Flower Fountain. Again, another invention that didn't get a name in the show, but Flower Fountain is a fitting name. It's a fountain with a built-in irrigation system so the flowers can basically grow themselves. It's kinda cool, I guess. I don't know. 6.2 out of 10. Next, we get kind of abusive with the Mega Kiddie Deluxe Playpen. It's literally a little playhouse with a lock on the door, so you can straight up lock your kids inside. Thankfully, Tommy is smart and can use his screwdriver to easily get out, but still the premise is pretty messed up. In an act of karma, the adults actually end up getting trapped inside of it. Don't like it, 0.1 out of 10. Next is the highly sought after Stove of the Future. Again, this one also didn't get a specific name, but Stu refers to it as the Stove of the Future, so that's what I'm going with. It's basically a fully automated stove robot. Ultimately, all it does is hit Drew in the head with pans and spray water everywhere, as well as blow a giant hole in Drew's kitchen ceiling.
Look at the bright side. Your kitchen has a skylight now.
It is fantastic for destroying your house if that's what you're after. 2.4 out of 10. Next is the wave of disaster preparedness equipment with the Earthquake Preparation Helmet, or E-Preparation H for short. Basically, it's a helmet that you put on your kid's head to protect them in the event of an earthquake. Solid 5 out of 10. Let's just hope that you know when the earthquake is coming so that you can make sure to put it on beforehand. And guess what? Now you will be able to know when the next earthquake is coming with the next invention, Stu Pickles' Earthquake Detection System. It's basically a seismograph that makes the same crackling noise as a Geiger counter would when it measures radiation. It's supposed to help detect when an earthquake is coming. I gotta deduct points because I know good and well that he didn't invent the seismograph. 4.2 out of 10. And what would an earthquake preparedness kit be without this? Early warning devices. Since dogs can detect earthquakes before they happen, these devices are connected to the dog's head, and as soon as they detect an earthquake, it'll trigger an alarm to warn people. Clever idea, honestly. Too bad they didn't work properly at all. 6.9 out of 10. And of course, nothing says I'm prepared for an earthquake quite like Stu straps. Big Velcro straps that are guaranteed to make your breakables unbreakable. Wrap them around your appliances, cupboards, garbage cans, and anything else to make sure it'll be secured during the earthquake you won't know is coming, because the Pickles Earthquake Detection System doesn't work at all. If he could actually make a device that would predict earthquakes, I'd go higher, but since he can't do that, I'd give the Stu straps a 2.3 out of 10. The Pickles Toys disaster preparedness phase may not have been successful, but at least nothing exploded this time. Next we move back to the plant game with the automatic plant waterer. It's a water tank with hoses that go into pots that are intended to water the plants, but instead the hoses just spray water all over your house. I love how after all these years, Stu still looks surprised when his inventions do more harm than good. I mean, how hard is it to water your plants yourself? 3.2 out of 10. Next, we get into the surveillance game with the Pickles closed circuit baby cam system. Basically, it's a closed circuit security camera system that Stu uses to watch the babies. It consists of small cameras that he has hidden all over the house in strange places. Definitely not creepy at all, but Stu didn't invent the closed circuit security system. This one's been done before. 2.2 out of 10. Next is the Pickles Noise Muffs. Essentially a pair of noise-canceling headphones. They guarantee the user absolute silence.
What?
Exactly.
Ahead of their time, and they work properly. Not a bad invention. 8.4 out of 10. Next, we get back into the holiday spirit with the giant neon dreidel. It's a huge light-up spinning dreidel that Stu has affixed on top of his house as a festive holiday decoration. I like this one. 7.9 out of 10. This is Stu's biggest invention since the giant animatronic Reptar. Christmasland. To quote Stu, he did for Christmasland what Michelangelo did for the Sistine Chapel. It's an entire festive Christmas village. A terminal Stu has set up gives him full control over the automation he set up at Christmasland.
Brace yourselves for the pièce de résistance. Each pavilion has its own control, and I can go from flurry to blizzard with just a turn of a knob.
Sadly, it malfunctions and everyone ends up getting snowed in. Still cool though, 7.1 out of 10. Next up is the hilarious Pickles Ultimate Satellite System.
Are you okay, Stu?
Sure thing, Deed. My puss broke my fall.
Your puss?
Yeah, Pickles Ultimate Satellite System.
A pair of satellite-operated walkie-talkies that allow for two people to communicate from far distances. Doesn't make much sense because cell phones exist and are affordable by this point in the series, but the name is absolutely hilarious, so it gets extra bonus points. Based alone on the fact that Stu said the word puss, 10 out of 10. Absolutely hilarious. And that is every single Pickles Toys invention. Which one's your favorite? Let me know in the comments down below. I can't begin to stress how hard it was to make this video, and I really hope you enjoyed watching it. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more of my awesome videos, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.